My name is Marianne Cano, Cano.
Ms. Cano, would you sit back in your chair
Is that too loud?
and try to keep this?
Yes. Yes.
Are you related to Lyle and Eric Menendez?
Yes, I am.
And what is your relationship to them?
I'm first cousin.
And who are your parents?
Marta Cano and Peter Cano.
If you look to your right, Ms. Connor, you'll see we have a family tree chart.
Can you see what's written on it?
Yes.
And do you see your parents' names?
Yes.
And do you see yourself?
Yes.
And are you here?
Correct.
So you're the third child of Marta and Peter Cano.
That's correct.
And what's your date of birth, Ms. Cano?
3/9/64.
So that would make you 4 years older than Lyle and 7 years older than Eric. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, when you were a young child, where did your parents live?
In Puerto Rico.
And at some point, did your family move to New Jersey, the Princeton area?
Yes.
And what year was that?
1979.
And when your family moved to the Princeton area in 1979, were you then living relatively close to Eric and Lyle?
Yes, we were.
Before your family moved to Princeton in 1979, had you seen Eric and Lyle periodically over the years?
Yes.
Did you get to see more of them after the family moved to New Jersey?
Yes.
On what sorts of occasions would you get to see Eric and Lyle?
Objection, Vegas to win.
When you moved to New Jersey? After you moved to New Jersey?
Family gatherings, Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays, Mother's Day, Father's Days. We pretty much had a reunion for every occasion, really.
Okay.
You have to speak up a little bit. Just
Can this go up a little?
Or we'll move that microphone. If,
It's a little bit too low for me.
okay,
That's
This
better.
witness is very soft-spoken.
just
Your Honor.
speak up if you can.
Is that
Okay.
better?
Yeah, that's better. That's better. So it would be for all sorts of holidays and birthdays and Mother's Day and Father's Day.
Yes.
And what would be the usual gathering place for the family?
It was at my Aunt Terry's house, usually.
And that's Terry and Carlos Baralt.
Yes.
And Terry Baralt is your mother's sister.
Yes.
And did Terry and Carlos Baralt have children as well?
Yes.
And they had 4 girls?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
So you would ordinarily the family would gather at their home?
Yes.
And did Jose and Kitty Menendez and their 2 boys join these family gatherings?
Yes, they did.
Now, I want to focus your attention on that period of time from 1979 to 1982, okay? In 1982, did you start college?
Yes, I did.
And so were you away from the family more?
Yes, I was.
So let's focus to that period before you started college. When you would see the Menendez family, Jose and Kitty and their 2 boys at these family gatherings, okay? Can you first tell us what your impression was, what you saw by way of interaction between Jose and Kitty?
Objection, irrelevant.
Be more specific as to what you're asking.
Okay. Did you see the way Jose and Kitty treated each other, talked to each other, acted towards each other at these gatherings when their children were present?
Yes.
And could you describe what you saw?
It was very impersonal. There was very little display of affection between them in a way that they did not appear to be a couple to me.
And was that different from what you were seeing with the other members of the family, the other married couples?
Yes.
Now, at this time, were your parents separated?
Yes, they were.
But before their separation, did your parents act more like a couple than what you saw with Jose and Kitty?
Objection, irrelevant, cause for speculation.
Sustain.
Now, when the boys, Eric and Lyle, when you saw them at these family gatherings between 1979 and 1982, did they behave differently than the other children of the family?
Objection, irrelevant.
Yes.
Objection sustained. The answer is stricken.
Well, Your Honor, that was just foundational to
Well,
their
let's
behavior.
get to it then.
Okay. How did Lyle and Eric behave at these family gatherings at your Aunt Terry's house?
Objection irrelevant.
Overruled.
They were very undisciplined to my eyes, wild, hyperactive.
Okay, describe what they did.
They would run around all the time.
Always running,
Yes,
always in motion.
yes,
Now, were they aggressive towards people at all?
no,
Did they ever spit or bite or hit or punch or do any of those things?
no,
Were they ever fresh or talk back to people at all?
no,
So they just moved all the time?
yes.
Now, were there occasional family gatherings at their house?
Not at the time,
Not during those years?
not during those years.
And would it be fair to say then the only time you really observed their behavior was when they're at someone else's house?
Yes,
Now, did anybody, strike that, did either of their parents ever say anything to them about their running around behavior?
occasionally my uncle would.
And when your uncle would say something about it, what did the boys do?
They would stop.
And would it take any arguments or any repetition on his part for them to stop?
No, it didn't.
Tell me how it would happen.
Objection irrelevant.
Overruled.
Well, they would be running around and for a long time before somebody would respond, and eventually my uncle would either just raise his hand or just call their name, and they would stop what they were doing immediately. Yeah.
And by your uncle, you do mean their father, Jose Menendez.
Yes, correct.
Did other people in the family try to stop their running around?
Well, we did sometimes.
We being who?
The cousins,
The older cousins?
the girl, we're all female cousins for the most part. We'd be trying to play cards or whatever we were doing. We would try to get them to calm down.
Okay. And did they calm down when you talked to them?
No,
And did you ever see your Aunt Kitty trying to calm them down or stop them?
I did not.
Did you ever see any other adult in the family try to say something to them and have your Uncle Jose stop the adult?
Yes.
What did you see in that regard?
Well, occasionally, one of either my Aunt Terry usually was the one who would say something to them, and my uncle would say, "Let them be. They need to, they need to be boys. You don't know,
They need to be boys, he said.
right?"
And would the other adults and some of the other cousins complain to Jose and Kitty about the boys' hyperactive behavior?
Objection irrelevant.
It's foundational, Your Honor.
Objection sustained.
Well, did you ever? How would your Uncle Jose respond if any of the other adults or any of the cousins complained about the fact that his boys were running through the house?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
Did he laugh at this behavior? Did you see your uncle laugh at this behavior of the boys?
He seemed to feel it was normal behavior for them and just thought it was funny most of the time. Yes.
Were you able to get to know Lyle or Eric during these years, 79 to 82?
No.
Why?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
Well, I'd like to be heard, Your Honor. Well, I'll rephrase it another way. Did you get to be close to them at all? To be
Yeah.
friendly with them, to be able to talk to them, to have a relationship with them, to show them affection, any of those things during these years?
No.
Overruled.
It was very hard to get to know my cousins. It was
All right. The question is, did you or did you not get to know them in the context of the question that was asked?
I did not get to know them in any of those
Ways?
ways.
Why?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
Your Honor, I'd like to be heard on this. Did you see if any of the other girl cousins like yourself had any greater success in approaching or getting to know the boys?
No,
Objection irrelevant.
You didn't see it or they
What is your
didn't?
answer?
no.
What do you mean by that?
I did not see any of my other female cousins get to know my cousins any better.
Okay. Now, do you have a younger brother named Andy?
Yes.
At some point, did it appear that Eric and Andy had formed a friendship?
During what time period?
Well, I'm not specifying, but was there a time period when that did happen?
Yes.
And do you recall what time period that was?
It was after I was in college.
Okay. Now, after you went to college, did you still join in some of the family gatherings?
Yes, I did.
Was that slightly less frequently than before?
Yes, it was.
And during that period of time, 1982 to 1986, did you again observe Eric and Lyle at these gatherings?
Yes.
And was there any change in their behavior during that period?
Yes, there was.
Would you tell us what they were like during that later period of time, 82 to 86?
They were,
And were they different from each other during this period also?
yes, they were different from each other also.
Okay. Then why don't you first describe how Lyle behaved at these family gatherings from 82 through 86?
Lyle was the more social. He would, we could actually converse with him for the first time, really. I had never really had a conversation with either one of them. So Lyle would actually ask me how school was, how my athletics were, could actually converse with him.
He showed an
Awesome.
interest in what you were doing?
Yes, he did.
I take it he wasn't running around the house anymore.
No, he wasn't running around the house anymore.
Okay. Was he mannered, well-mannered, civil, polite?
Yes, he was.
And what about Eric? What was Eric like at these family gatherings from 82 through 86?
Eric was still very difficult to hug. They were both difficult to hug throughout, but at this time, Lyle was, in Latin families, we tend to say hello with a hug and a kiss in the cheek, and it was, with Eric, it was very difficult. It seemed like he had a hard time receiving affection.
Did he have a hard time receiving physical touching? Did you notice that?
Yeah.
When they were younger, during the 79 through 82 period, did you also notice that both of them would pull away from hugs?
Yes.
Did both of them at that time seem to be having difficulty receiving affection?
Yes.
Objection sustained. The answer is stricken.
Tell us what they did when they were younger when someone tried to hug them.
They would pull away and stay very stiff.
Like cringe?
I don't know what cringe means. They would just stay very stiff and not reciprocate any affection. And it was almost very uncomfortable to even try to hug them because it was a stiff lug which you were hugging.
Okay, they didn't show any hostility. They didn't try to brush you away or anything. They just closed.
They just
on
stay
themselves.
stiff. It was not received.
And in the later years, you found that Eric still had that reaction to your attempts to hug him?
Yes.
Overall, the answer will stand.
And what about, as compared to Lyle, who was making social conversation, would Eric do that in the later years?
No, he didn't.
What did he do at these gatherings?
I didn't see him interact very much with anyone. If anyone, it was with my younger brother, Andy.
So that's the only person in the family you saw him interact with?
Yes.
Would you try to talk to Eric, ask him questions, start a conversation?
Overall,
Yes, I would try. I would try to, but it was clear that after a few monosyllables as answers that I wasn't going to get very far to get to know him.
He was silent?
Yes.
Was he being hostile or unfriendly or just silent?
Quiet. Reserved.
Now, during these later years, 82 through 86, when you'd be at these family gatherings, was the attendance of the Menendez family, Jose and Kitty and the two boys, different than what it had been in the earlier period?
Yes.
And would you tell us what was different?
As a general statement, they tended to be the last ones to arrive, the first ones to leave, and many times one or the other of my cousins was not present, or one or the other of my aunt and uncle were not present.
So sometimes only one parent would show up and both boys wouldn't be there.
Yes,
And did you know where the boys were, where the other parent was?
Section hearsay in the room.
Sustained.
And when you say they were the last to show up and the first to leave, did they stay very long at these gatherings during the years 82 to 86?
Section irrelevant.
Overall.
it seemed like they would stay least time than anyone else. They would just get there last minute prior to when we would start eating almost and leave as soon as we were done. So it was
So there
in
was,
and out.
so there was no time to socialize or to get to know them?
Correct.
And how would the departures from these family gatherings come about?
Section irrelevant.
Was there some member of the family who would decide it was time to leave and signal the rest?
Yes.
And who was that?
It was my uncle.
You have to use his name. You have a number of uncles that are at these gatherings.
It was Uncle Jose.
And what would he do?
Section irrelevant.
Overall.
He would either snap his fingers, okay, Lyle, Eric, Kitty, let's go. I mean, that was it.
That was it. Now, in 1986, that spring or early summer, did your mother and the rest of your family move to Florida?
Yes, some members of my family.
And did you remain in the Princeton area for that summer?
Yes, I did.
And where did you live starting in June of 1986?
I lived with my aunt and uncle, Kitty and Jose, and Eric and Lyle.
And at that time, let me get the house straight. At that time, what house were they living in?
They were living in the Princeton house.
The one on Mountain Avenue?
Yes.
This probably won't work for very long, but that's this house here.
Yes.
Correct. Is that a large house?
Very large.
And what was the physical setting of it? How did you get to that house from the street, say?
There was a gate, but not a guard gate, a gate that you would unlock yourself. That wasn't locked. You would just lift the handle and go in and get back in your car, and you drove about a quarter of a mile or so. It was a long ways from the street.
It was a private road?
Yes,
It just led to that house?
only to the house.
And what was the physical setting along that road? Was it open space, field, or was it wood?
It was woods. It was kind of scary. It's,
Scary?
to me, it was.
And
Okay.
so you drove a quarter of a mile, and then you got to this house, which was all by itself in the woods.
Hmm. Yes, yes, yes. Sorry.
And when you stayed at that house, was this the first time that you had ever stayed with Jose and Kitty Menendez and their children?
Yes, it was the first time.
Now, were you able, when you were living with them, how long did you stay there?
I stayed from about the end of June through August, like mid-August or so.
And originally, had you planned to stay longer?
Yes, I had.
And did you leave early?
Yes.
Why did you leave early?
I was very uncomfortable in the house.
Were you uncomfortable with the house, or were you uncomfortable with the people in the house?
I was uncomfortable all around with the house and with my feelings of the people in the house.
Now, while you were living in the house, you have described before that at family gatherings you see Jose and Kitty Menendez, and you saw no affection and no interaction. Did you see anything different when you were living?
I saw no affection between any family members.
And how did Jose treat Kitty in front of his children that you observed while you were living with him?
I saw a lot of mocking and making fun of Kitty.
Was this good-natured, lighthearted, mocking and making fun? Or was it something else?
I don't know what you mean by
Well, was it
good-natured.
just joking or was it sarcastic? Was it hurtful?
It was hurtful. I would see tears in my eyes every so often.
And how often did this mocking behavior by Jose go on?
I saw it constantly.
Every day.
Yes.
Did you see any other way, in fact, of his relating to her other than this mocking, hurtful?
No, I didn't.
Now, you said you saw no affection between any family members. Did you see did you either see or hear anything that sounded like or looked like affection or love from Kitty to either of the boys?
No, I did not.
If you'd back up a little bit from that mic.
It's too loud.
I'm hearing you breathing at this point. And concerning Jose and his sons, did you see anything affectionate or warm or supportive from him to his boys?
No.
Did you see anything kind from either of these parents to either of the boys?
Sustained.
Did you see any kindness being displayed?
No.
Do you recall what dinner time was like in that household when Jose was home?
Yes.
And would you describe, and when Jose was there and when one or both of the boys were there,
Yes.
could you describe what the atmosphere at dinner was like?
I found it very almost like a business. It was very impersonal. It was a question answer session, I felt, about at the time it was sports is all I heard.
So there were questions and quizzes about sports.
Yes.
Overall.
Correct.
And was it, what was the emotional context? I mean, how were people talking to each other? Was it?
There was not much emotion. It was very matter of fact interaction, which was very odd to me.
Was odd to you?
Strike the conclusion, it was very odd.
All right, that portion of the answer is stricken. The rest will remain.
I want to turn your attention to a particular dinner time conversation involving Jose Menendez and Eric, okay? Do you recall there was a day when Eric lost a tennis match?
Yes.
Let's go back to the tennis match. Were you there?
Yes, I was.
And where was this match held? Do you recall?
It was in a Princeton area court. I don't recall exactly.
And do you know whether this was some major tournament or just some minor match, some routine thing?
It was not a major tournament. I don't know the exact nature of it.
But it was, your understanding was it was just a routine type of tennis match.
Yes.
And who attended the match?
My Aunt Kitty and myself.
And Eric was playing.
Yes.
Lyle wasn't there, nor was he playing in that match.
No.
Would you, well, first of all, tell us, how did Eric play in that match?
That's irrelevant.
Sustained.
Your Honor, this is foundational to the behavior of the parents.
Okay, counsel, just, is it the result of the game? Is that what you're
No.
asking? Did he win
How
or
was he
lose?
doing? And I wanted to talk about what was going on during the match.
Well, just ask it another way.
Okay. Did you observe your Aunt Kitty during the match?
Yes.
And what was she doing?
She was watching Eric play.
And how did she look when she was watching Eric play?
That's irrelevant.
Overall.
Eric was not doing very well, and she was getting very uptight and upset.
And how could you tell that she was uptight and upset?
She was, based on what she was saying and how she was responding physically. I mean, she was.
Show us what she was doing physically, if you can, Ms. Cano.
I mean, she would almost. It's hard to describe.
Well, you keep clenching your fists. Was she clenching her fists?
Yes. She
And what
would
else was she
get,
doing?
saying, "Come on, Eric! I can't believe he's losing this match. I can't believe he's losing. I can't believe he's playing so poorly. He should never be beat by this guy." And it was just, she was very upset about how he was playing.
Was she talking in a loud or forceful tone of voice?
She was talking a loud, upset voice next to me.
Okay. Was she saying anything to Eric?
No,
And what was the look on her face? Can you recall?
a frowned, upset look.
And did you see Eric at the end of the match?
Yes, I did.
And was he coming towards where you and your Aunt Kitty were?
He went straight to the car.
And did you see the look on his face?
Yes,
And how did he look?
he looked devastated.
He looked upset also.
Beyond upset.
And did you then all get in the car and go somewhere?
We were driving back home.
And what conversation, if any, what interaction, if any, did you observe between Kitty and Eric in the car?
There was total silence on the entire ride home.
She said nothing to him.
No,
Did you say anything?
I did not feel it was appropriate. I felt very uncomfortable.
Yeah, move to strike is not responsible.
No,
Objection sustained. The answer is stricken.
And what happened once you got home?
Eric went to his room or somewhere, and I stayed in the kitchen helping my aunt prepare dinner.
And did she talk any more about the tennis match while you were preparing dinner with her?
No,
Irrelevant.
Overruled.
And,
No.
it-
no,
didn't talk to you.
she did not.
and did at some point did Jose come home?
Yes, shortly after.
And did you observe an interaction between Jose and Kitty when he came home?
Yes,
And would you tell us what you saw and heard? This is not offered for the truth, Your Honor, but to explain Mr. Menendez's subsequent behavior.
as he walked in the door, the first thing he asked was, "How did Eric do?" And my aunt proceeded to explain to him the different things he had missed in the game. Like he missed several serves, and apparently his backhand was not the greatest that day, and that was what was talked about.
So she basically gave a detailed critique of Eric's performance at the match.
Definitely.
Sustained.
Did she give him details about what had happened to the match?
She gave him details about what happened exactly.
Okay, she didn't just say, well, he lost.
No, she's described in what way he lost.
Did she make any excuses for Eric's performance in talking to Jose?
No,
And what was Jose's response to what Kitty Head was telling him?
he took it very lightly and almost laughed.
He almost laughed. Did he say anything?
I just recall him going, "Figures."
It figures. Now, was there a dinner later that evening with yourself and Jose and Kitty and Eric?
Yes.
And would you tell us what happened during that dinner?
The entire dinner conversation was about Eric's match. And it was directed towards Eric in terms of mocking and saying how he was not playing hard enough, practicing hard enough, and therefore never be good enough.
And who was doing the talking?
My uncle, Jose.
And how long did this criticism go on?
For a long time.
An hour?
I don't recall exactly, but the length of the dinner.
And did Eric eat anything during that dinner?
Eric barely touched his plate.
And did you observe his facial expressions, his demeanor during this talking by his father?
Eric was constantly looking down at his plate, blank look on his face, and when I did finally look at his eyes, he had tears and a look of much pain in his eyes.
Did he say anything back to his father?
No, he did not.
Did he defend himself?
No,
Did he argue?
no,
Did he make excuses?
no.
And what about Kitty? Did she say anything during this dinner?
No.
At some point, did Eric leave the table?
Yes, he did.
And was dinner over at that point, or did he leave while it was still going on?
Dinner was not quite over.
And where did he go?
He went downstairs to the basement.
And at that point, when he first left the table, did you start to get up to go somewhere?
I attempted to get up, yes.
And what were you going to do?
I was concerned about Eric. I was going to go towards Eric.
And did your Uncle Jose at that point do something with respect to you?
Yes.
What did he do?
He just raised his hand, Marianne, and I stopped.
So that gesture with his hand up and calling your name stopped you from leaving to go after Eric.
Yes.
Now, a little while later that evening, did you find Eric?
Yes.
And where was he?
Eric was still downstairs in the basement.
And what happened between you and Eric in the basement? Did you have a conversation with him?
Objection overruled.
Thank you. Did you have a conversation with him?
I snuck down to the basement to see how Eric was doing.
Why did you sneak?
Sustained.
Go ahead.
Just to ask your next question, please.
You went down, you snuck down to the basement to see how he was doing, and what did you do next?
I just put my arm on his shoulder and
Whose shoulder?
Eric's shoulder, and I just said, it must not be fun to be made fun of all the time.
And what was Eric's response?
He, without looking at me, just looking blank into the floor, he just said, "It's all right, I'm used to it."
And was that the end of the conversation?
Yes.
What was he doing when you went down into the basement? When you first saw him there, what was he doing?
He was sitting on a stool, just looking at the floor.
And what was he doing when he told you, "It's all right, I'm used to it"?
He was still sitting on the stool, looking at the floor.
And did you stay with him, or did you leave at that point?
No, I left.
Now, was this episode that you've described, this dinner, was this the first time that you had seen Jose criticizing and making fun of Eric at dinner?
No, it was not the first time.
Was that a frequent occurrence?
Yes.
Now, was this just fun teasing of Eric, or was it harsh criticism?
In my perception, it was harsh.
What aspects of what you saw in their home did you consider harsh treatment? What did you see that you considered harsh treatment?
I don't understand
Okay.
the question.
What you just described is like a criticism and a ridiculing, correct?
Yes.
Were there other things that you saw that you considered harsh?
What I considered harsh is just the overall treatment towards Eric, and the constant mocking, and the fact that he could never do anything right in my eyes.
Well, he couldn't do anything right for you, or you mean what he's being told he could never do anything right?
He was told he could never do anything right. I never saw him being reinforced positively for anything, even when he did do something right.
And he did win things, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
And when he won, he never got any praise for it or any
I never saw that.
Would he sometimes be ridiculed and mocked by his father even when he won because he somehow didn't do it the perfect way that his father wanted him to do it?
Sustained.
Did you ever hear his father mocking or ridiculing him after he had won?
I wouldn't call it mocking and ridiculing. I would see a correction on something that could have been better.
So
More
he was
so.
corrected.
Yes.
Did you know, by the way, during that summer that you were living with the family, that Eric was attending a school for people with learning disabilities?
No, I was not aware of that.
Were you aware of the fact that he was attending school at all that summer?
No.
Was he gone for part of each day?
He left early in the morning, and I thought he was going to a tennis camp all day. And I would go with my aunt sometimes to pick him up from the tennis camp.
And that would be in the afternoon?
Yes.
And I take it neither your aunt nor your uncle ever talked about the fact that Eric had any learning difficulties?
No, they did not.
At family gatherings, would your Aunt Kitty, in front of everyone, including the children, brag about the boys?
Rick in Vegas tomorrow.
Overall.
The conversation in family gatherings that I had observed prior to my living at the Menendez home, my cousin's home, it was always, when it was conversation when it was geared about the boys, it was about which match they had won, who they had beaten, or what current tournament was upcoming in some way.
So her discussion about them was focused on winning.
I would say competition-oriented, event-oriented.
Okay. She never talked about them as people?
Passion, process, preparation, conclusion.
Sustained.
In front of you, did she ever just talk about their personal qualities, like he's a good boy, he's a sweet boy, he's a nice boy, he's artistic, he's talented, any of that?
About our athletically gifted, athletically champions in the different tournaments. In that respect, yes.
And only in that respect.
Yes.
And the same is true with respect to her talking about Lyle, I take it.
Yes.
You've described the dinner time conversations as businesslike. Were they tense?
Very tense.
Now, you visited the Menendez family here in California after they moved, did you not?
Yes.
And you spent some time alone with your Aunt Kitty?
Yes.
Alone meaning you had come here with your brother, had you not?
Yes.
And then he left. This is your older brother, Peter?
He's younger than I am.
I'm sorry, your younger brother, Peter.
Yes.
And then the youngest is Andy.
Yes.
He's a younger brother still, right?
Correct.
All right. So you had come here with Peter, and then Peter went off, and you stayed a day with your Aunt Kitty?
Yes, I did.
And what did she do to entertain you that day?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
Was Eric with you and your Aunt Kitty that day?
For part of the time.
Okay. What did you do after? Did you pick him up someplace? Is that what happened?
Yes.
After you picked Eric up, what happened?
We went to see the house in Calabasas that was under construction or remodeling in some way.
And did she point certain things out to you in the house?
Yes.
And was there something about her demeanor and the way she was talking that struck you that day?
Objection
Yes.
irrelevant.
Sustained.
In the present, was this discussion with her and her walking you through the house in Eric's presence?
Yes.
And did
Do we
you,
have a time frame when this was?
this was in 19,
Counsel asked the question.
when was this?
1980, 88 or 87.
Between 1987 and 1988?
Yes.
What time of year was it that you came?
I went in the summertime.
And the Calabasas house was under construction at that time?
Yes.
From what you could see, was this a house that was being remodeled?
Objection irrelevant.
Overall.
I wouldn't know. I know it was under construction, and you could see that it was under construction. There were
Okay.
like wooden beams, and I don't know. I wouldn't know. I'm knowing the difference.
Okay, so you don't know if it was an existing house that was being changed or
No,
brand new
I didn't know.
construction? Okay. During the course then of this time when she's showing you this house, were you struck by anything about the way she was talking about it?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
Were you, either when you were in Princeton with your Aunt Kitty or when you were here with her, made aware of her use to any extent of drugs or tranquilizers?
Objection irrelevant.
As to the form of the question, the objection is sustained.
Did you know whether or not your Aunt Kitty was taking tranquilizer pills? Let's start with in Princeton when you were staying with the family.
Objection irrelevant.
As to the form of the question, the objection is sustained. Question is, did you see?
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. Did you see her taking pills?
Yes, I did.
Did she also tell you she was taking pills?
Objection calls for motion.
Overall.
She didn't tell me. I was next to her.
Okay, tell us what you saw.
Well, we were in the kitchen, and she took out a bottle that I could read. It said Valium on it.
Move this
And-
back as fair
Overall.
And so I saw her taking them, and she must have seen a questioning look in my.
All right, you've answered the question.
Did she say something to you after you had seen her take the pills?
She said that that was the way she got through the day.
I want to turn your attention for a moment, Ms. Cano, to the layout of the house in Princeton. When you stayed there that summer, did you stay in a particular room?
I stayed in one of the guest rooms.
And what was the access to that room? Say you come in the front door, how do you get from the entryway to that particular room?
It would be on the right wing of the house.
And was it on the same level as the entry?
You would go up a few steps and then sort of make a right so that my room would be facing the entrance, the driveway into the entrance of the house.
Now, when you go up those few steps to get to that guest room, do those steps only lead to that guest room?
Yes,
So that guest room had its own separate way in and out of it, correct?
right.
Now, do you know where the master bedroom was located in the house?
It was totally separate from where I was.
Was it to the far right?
It was to the far right, but it had a different walkway leading to that area.
And do you recall that there was a staircase right next to the master bedroom that led upstairs to Eric's room?
Yes.
Did your Aunt Kitty ever hug you?
Objection irrelevant.
Overall.
No.
Did you hug her?
I tried once and it wasn't well received, so I didn't again.
And just to clarify, I originally talked to you about these things, do you recall, on March 11th, 1993.
Yes,
And I showed you the summary that I wrote of our conversation the other night. You recall that?
yes,
And did you correct one aspect, that when you were staying at this house, it was before the family moved to California, not after?
that's correct.
And when you had indicated that you remember being there for one period of time alone with Lyle, what was the correction that you gave me?
It was prior to the family moving to California, and it was during a trip where Eric had gone away for a match with my aunt and uncle, and I stayed there with only Lyle in the house.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I'm not further on.
Any questions on behalf of Lyle Menendez? Cross-examination.
Ms. Cano, regarding this thing you've just testified to about when you stayed with Lyle, that was while the family was still living in Princeton, is that correct?
Yes,
And that was during the summer of 1986?
yes,
And that would have been then before you left in August, is that correct?
yes,
Before you went off to college in 1902, I believe you testified that your family moved to the Princeton area in 1979. Is that correct?
What date did you say? I went to college in
82.
1982. Yes.
All right. And then between 1979 and 1982, you were living in the Princeton area. Is that correct?
That's, well, yes, Princeton, not in Princeton town, Lawrenceville or
Within an
West
hour?
Windsor. Yes.
Okay. And I believe you indicated that the family, that it would be the Menendez family, had many family gatherings. Is that correct?
I did not indicate that they had family gatherings at that time.
Well, between 1979 and 1982, do you remember testifying about the behavior of the defendants, that they were wild?
You know, I think Joseph confusing the ways by using the phrase Menendez.
All right.
All right, if you can rephrase the question, clarify, please.
I'm talking about the family, your mother, your aunt, and your Uncle Jose, that family. All right, do you understand what I'm referring to?
Yes.
And I believe you indicated that there were family gatherings involving the cousins, the aunts and uncles. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did that also involve your grandparents?
Yes.
And I believe you indicated that these gatherings occurred at your Aunt Terry's house. Is that correct?
Right.
And I believe you indicated that they were frequent. Isn't that what you testified to?
I said they were basically after in any special occasion, any holiday, we always had gatherings. Yes.
And
That's what I call frequent.
All right.
Mother's Day, Father's Day, birthdays. There's a lot of cousins, a lot of birthdays.
So would these gatherings have been at least once a month, would you say?
Yes.
And did you celebrate all the cousins and the aunt and uncles and your grandparents' birthdays as well?
Everybody's.
And during this period of time, now I'm referring to between 1979 and when you went to college,
Right.
that's the period we're talking about where the gatherings were frequent. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I believe you indicated that the defendants during this time period would run around the house a lot.
Yes, they did.
Now, most of the cousins are female in your family. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I think you indicated that that you would try to play cards or do something with your female cousins, and that the defendants would be running around. Is that correct?
Yes, I said that.
Now, how far away from the defendant's home did you live during this 3-year time period?
We moved several times within that time period, so it varied each year. but we always lived within a half hour's distance, within 20 minutes to a half hour at the most.
And during that period of 3 years before you went to college, did you ever go to the Menendez's home? That is the defendant's home.
I may have gone to, in passing, not to a gathering that I recall at their home during that period of time.
I believe you indicated that in 1982 you started college. Is that correct?
Yes,
What state did you go to college?
in Pennsylvania.
And how many hours would it take you to return to the family gatherings while you were in college?
It was 3 hours away.
So during that period of time, the 4 years that you were in college, did you attend these gatherings less frequently?
That's correct.
And so you were aware that there were gatherings going on that you did not go to, correct?
Yes, there were.
Now, during that period of 3 years when, before you went to college and you'd have these family gatherings, you indicated that defendants would run around a lot. What were they doing?
It seemed like hide and seek almost. Run around the house,
Would they,
hiding and running. And just,
would they ever play with any of your boy cousins?
I don't recall it at that time. I don't have any boy cousins, by the way. They're my brothers.
I'm sorry. Well, may I approach your honor and get the family tree back up? All right, so the only other male cousins in the family would be your brothers, Peter and Andy, correct?
That's correct.
And so there were 4 girls by Terry and Carlos, and then 3 girls in your family, correct?
That's right.
And so the total number of boy cousins were the 2 defendants and your 2 brothers, correct?
That's right.
Did you ever see your 2 brothers playing with their cousins, the defendants, during this 3-year period of time before you went to college?
They did on occasion.
Now, during these family gatherings, did the adults ever go and leave the kids alone to play together?
I don't know what you mean by go.
Well,
Go where?
sometimes at family gatherings, the adults go do their thing and the children do something different. Did that ever occur at these family gatherings before you went to college?
Yes.
Now, I believe you indicated at some point while you were at college that your brother Andy became close with Eric. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did you notice that they were close when you went to the family gatherings during the 4 years you were in college?
During the 4 years I went in college, that's when I noticed that they would spend time together talking, which I hadn't seen before.
Now, while you were at college, approximately how many of these gatherings would you go to per year?
It's hard for me to say exactly, but it varied depending on how busy I was that year. So it varied per year. I would say definitely Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, and Mother's Day and Father's Day.
But less so for birthdays?
Less so for birthdays, yes.
When you went in the summer of 1986 to stay with the Menendez family, how were the arrangements made for you to do that? Was it at your request? Were you invited? How did that come about?
My Aunt Kitty offered for me to stay with her when she found my family was moving, and I wasn't sure that I was ready to move to Florida just yet at the time.
And did you eventually move to Florida, or did you stay on the East Coast?
I know I moved to Florida.
Was that in August of 1986 that you moved to Florida?
Yes,
And that was to where your mother was living, correct?
that's right.
So you were invited by Kitty Menendez to stay with them while your mom moved somewhere else, correct?
That's right.
Was she ever nice to you?
Yes, she was.
Did you ever do things with her?
Yes,
What
many
kind-
times.
What kind of things would you and she do together, just generally?
We went shopping. She liked to go to a little Danish village outside of Princeton. We went there many times. We would go work out. I like to work out, and she would come with me.
All right, so she was nice to you that summer, is that correct?
I did things with her. She was a fun aunt to be with. Yeah, she was always up and ready to do things outside the house.
Did she behave differently around her husband?
Yes.
And could you describe the change in her behavior when she was with you versus when her husband was around?
I don't know if there's just specifically a change in behavior. It was just with me. It was more of a buddy system. We'd be like go do things together, like a buddies. When she was at home, it was more of a structured self. I don't know how to describe that.
Did you ever see Mr. Menendez try to humiliate his wife in front of you?
Yes, I did.
And did he ever do things that would make her almost cry?
What I described was he said things that would make her almost cry. Yes.
Now, did you ever see Mr. Menendez hit anyone in the house, yourself included?
I never witnessed any hitting. No.
Did you ever see your Aunt Kitty ever try to defend her sons to their father?
I did. I did on a few occasions.
And what would be the result when she tried to defend her sons against their father?
I don't know if I call it defend, but it was when she would say, "Oh, Jose," or something like that. It would almost redirect the mocking towards her. So it didn't happen very frequently.
I believe you indicated that on occasion, while you were living in the house that summer of '86, that you saw Mrs. Menendez take a pill which you believed to be Valium. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you ever see any change in her behavior as a result of having taken this pill?
No.
Did you ever see her pass out?
No, I didn't see her pass out.
During this summer that you lived there in 1986, was Mr. Menendez home every night and every weekend?
No.
Okay, could you describe, did he take business trips?
Yes.
And can you describe how frequently he would take them? Was it a weekly occurrence, a monthly occurrence?
Well, I was only there under 2 months, so to my understanding, it was very frequently that he would be out of town.
And would that be for more than a day or two at a time?
Yes.
While you were living there that summer, did anybody else come and spend the night there? Any other relatives or friends of the defendants or anyone that you recall?
While I was staying there, no.
Now, during these dinner conversations, which you've described, were you ever asked to participate in them in terms of listing what you had done, or did you ever participate?
Yes.
And in what regard did you participate?
Well, at the time I was interviewing for jobs. And so I would be asked how my interview went, what kinds of questions they asked me, and how I responded, those kinds of things.
Did they ever offer you help in how to respond to a job interview, either of the parents?
Yes.
Which parent?
Both.
I believe you indicated that you went to at least one tennis match where Eric Menendez played and lost. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you go to any other tennis matches with that Eric Menendez played in that summer with his mom?
I did not attend any other after that.
Now, I believe that a lot of your testimony on direct examination dealt with Eric Menendez. Was Lyle Menendez home that summer?
I know he was living there. I didn't see Lyle very much.
All right. When you say he was living there, where was he living? Was he living in the house?
His room was sort of off to the left wing of the house, almost separate from the house. So I couldn't, if he was home or not home, most of the time I wouldn't know.
Did he join in these dinner table conversations when he was there?
Sometimes.
How
But
often? I'm sorry.
No, I said many times Lyle would not be present.
And did you ever have dinner? Did you ever have dinner with a family where Mr. Menendez was not present because he was out of town?
Yes.
In your presence, did you ever see Mr. Menendez interact with his son Lyle?
A few times.
Did he treat?
Not many.
From what you could tell, did he treat Lyle differently from the way he treated Eric?
I wasn't exactly comparing it. It was still the times that I saw it was Lyle's girlfriend was present.
All right. Now you say Lyle's girlfriend was present. Was this at a dinner?
It would be, yes, a couple of times at a dinner or in the living room watching a movie. That was more of the setting where I would see Lyle.
During the 2 months that you stayed there in 1986, did Lyle Menendez appear to have a girlfriend during that entire time?
Yes, he had a girlfriend.
And she came to the home frequently?
I rarely saw Lyle without his girlfriend when he was at the house.
I believe you indicated that in the summer of either 1987 or 1988, you and your brother Peter came to California, and you had one day where you were here without your brother Peter. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And when you were staying here when your brother was here, where did you stay?
I only stayed one night at I don't know exactly where the house was located. It was not Calabasas' house, another house.
It was not the Calabasas house?
No, that was under construction.
All right. Did you stay with the Mr. and Mrs. Menendez during that time?
Yes.
May I have a moment, please?
Yes. Any redirect?
Ms. Cano, you described an aspect of your relationship with your Aunt Kitty as like buddies, and you'd go out and have fun together.
That's right.
Did you ever see her treat her sons that way, the way she treated you?
No.
They didn't seem to be buddies, did they?
Objection called for speculation.
Sustain.
And you also indicated to Mrs. Bozanich that you don't recall any other relatives or any friends staying over at the house in Princeton while you were there, correct?
Correct.
Do you recall ever meeting any friends of Eric or Lyle, ever?
No.
With respect to your personal knowledge, was your brother Andy the only friend that you ever knew Eric had?
The only person I saw Eric interacting with and speaking with. So to my understanding, I would say yes.
Did Eric or his parents or anybody else in the family in Eric's presence ever talk about any other person who was supposedly a friend of his?
Objection calls for hearsay.
Sustain.
Was anyone ever identified or pointed out to you as a friend of Eric's besides your own brother?
No.
Now, you said that the few times that you saw Lyle at the house that summer, he was in the company of his girlfriend.
Yes.
What was her name?
Stacy.
And when Stacy was there at the house, was Mr. Menendez less likely to be mocking and humiliating and belittling Lyle?
It would occur, but not like it did in the dinner table. It was different.
And was it primarily Mr. Menendez's way of treating the rest of his family that made you not want to stay there?
I would say it was just the overall unaffectionate ambiance of the household that I felt very uncomfortable with. It was very unlike what I'm used to.
What you were used to?
Right.
I have nothing further.
Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. You may step down. You're excused. And who is the next witness?
It's a lengthy witness, I think we need for it to watch the phone.
All right, how long do you think that hearing will take before she's ready to testify before the juries? Okay, we'll resume, ladies and gentlemen, at 10 minutes after 10 minutes after 11, rather. Don't discuss this case with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. And we'll resume at 10 minutes after 11. And we'll see both juries back here then. Defendants are in court. All counsel are present. The jurors are not. Counsel indicate they have a issue to resolve regarding the testimony of the next witness.
Your Honor, I think that rather than go through the statements that we have from this witness bit by bit, that perhaps it's just easier to object as the testimonies presented. But there are two areas that I think we need to address. The first is that I'm aware that the two statements we have from this witness are not the only statements that she's made. And my concern is that, and I don't know this, I'm sort of shooting in the dark, but that there may be statements of the defendants offered since they've been in custody. And if that is the case, I would like to be heard.
No, that's not the case.
All right. The other thing is, I think that there's a dispute. We have provided the defense, after Mrs. Cano testified partially on direct, Detective Zola prepared a report, which he gave to the defense and actually made a correction to it as to when this occurred. It was a conversation that he had with Martha Cano in October of '89, and it was not previously memorialized, and so I asked him to make a report of what he told me, and that was then provided to the defense, and I think his agency has some issue as to the people's use of this in rebuttal. In other words, it's a statement that's at variance with the beginning of the testimony.
Well, Your Honor, this was a statement taken in 1990, and the very first thing we did vis-a-vis discovery was we filed, this is pre-prop 115, strike that. This is a statement taken in 1989, before the defendants were arrested. And when they were arrested, when their attorneys were on the case, we filed the detailed.
Why don't you turn on your mics so we can.
I think it is. It's on, just too far away.
We filed a standard discovery motion in municipal court, and we were never provided with the statement, and they don't give us the statement now until the middle of until the witness has already started to testify, and as counsel for the people has said, has testified in what, in their opinion, is at variance with the statement. So we would indeed object as a flagrant violation of every conceivable discovery rule, the old rules and the new rules, that they come up with this statement at this point. There's another question about the reliability of this statement, because we also had received on discovery all of the officers' notes, and there were no notes to support this statement. So 4 years later, off the top of his head, for the officer to dictate this statement and for the people to be able to use it, we think is inappropriate.
All right, I haven't seen the statement. I have no idea what's on it.
I have a copy for the court, Your Honor.
All right, I've read the report. What is the people's response?
The people's response is that, first of all, this does not violate the discovery order which is in existence in this case, because this is a statement of a defense witness. This woman has never been on the prosecution's witness list, number one. As soon as the information was provided to me, I gave it to the defense for purposes of using it in impeachment. Number one. Number two, I am quite certain that every word uttered to Detective Zoller during the course of the preceding 4 years has not been memorialized in writing. There's no legal requirement that such statements be memorialized in writing. And insofar as this was given to the defense, as soon as it became relevant, the only remedy that they should be able to avail themselves of is a continuance. There should not be another sanction for something that is not a violation of a discovery order, nor is it reasonable to expect that every contact that Detective Zoller had during this 4-year period would be memorialized in writing.
Is that under the old discovery rules, we asked for all interviews with all potential witnesses and all notes of interviews, and this information was never provided to us. It is not accurate for the people to say that they prepared this. This witness has been on our witness list since the beginning, but that they prepared this in anticipation of her testimony when it's prepared in the middle.
Yes, I mean, to that
extent, it's true. Detective Zoller has always been on their witness list. And this is a statement made to him, and theoretically, he would be the witness testifying to this information, and therefore this information as a basis for his testimony should have been provided to us from the very beginning.
Well, one of the issues has to do with whether or not rebuttal evidence or strike that impeachment evidence is subject to the discovery order, and that has been briefly discussed before. The defense took the position that it should not be, and the prosecution has requested that they be treated in a similar fashion. And why is this not just impeachment evidence then that need not be disclosed if the people never intended to call Mrs. Cano as a witness, and that this is only used if she is called by the defense and if she testifies at variance to what it was that is alleged to have been said to Detective Zoller?
Because this should have been turned over to us in the pre-115 rules of discovery when there were no such exceptions. When this was a person they had interviewed as a potential witness, when they had this information, when they violated a previous discovery order to give us the names of all the people they had interviewed, to give us all the police officer notes, and none of this ever was forthcoming, for them to hold back. And now that there's 115 to claim that this is impeachment, when it's created in the midst of the witness's testimony, is, I think it violates every concept of discovery. And I don't believe that even under 115, based on the reasoning of the court in Izazaga, that the same rules necessarily apply for the defense's gathering of impeachment evidence against the prosecution witnesses as it does for the prosecution gathering evidence prior to any decision about who's going to be called, such as this, for use against the defense. I mean, I point out, Your Honor, we have turned over to the prosecution both the names and the statements of witnesses whose sole purpose in being called is to impeach a prosecution witness, such as Ms. McPhee, such as Ms. Corey. We turned those over. So if there truly was a no impeachment turnover rule, we wouldn't be giving up those statements of those witnesses. And yet we have. So I don't think that something like this, which is a police report of an interview of a witness, is the same as simply, excuse me, a document, for example, such as someone's CV or resume, that we intend to show a witness their own document. I think that's very different, because that would help a prosecution witness change their testimony before they testify. But something like this, which isn't just a document that the witness would be familiar with, we think does have to be turned over. Since they are theoretically supposed to turn all their rebuttal over to us once we make discovery and before trial, this should have been turned over at the latest then.
All right. Well, number one, the issue of rebuttal or impeachment evidence as it relates to discovery is something that potentially will be an ongoing issue in this case, or problem in this case, and something that we certainly should address further. I don't know if this is the appropriate time to do it. We're specifically addressing this one issue, and I'm just looking at the discovery order that was made in this case, and my recollection is that there is no specific reference to this particular subject. And well, but the reason for that is that the understanding was that there wouldn't be a requirement. The situation arises when a decision is made to call a witness, and when that decision is made, then certain rules apply in regards to discovery. The situation in regards to this particular document could very well occur throughout the balance of this trial, in that a witness will testify, and whether the witness was called by the prosecution or the defense, and thereafter, in the recollection of some other witness, somebody will have information that would impeach. And just because the document has not already been generated that contains that information shouldn't preclude the proponent of the evidence from offering it. That's really what has occurred here. Is it the defense position that every witness who was interviewed or the subject of a conversation by the police should have had every word documented in a report, and if it was not, then the prosecution should be precluded from using it?
No, of course not, Your Honor. It's not every word that matters, but I do believe under the original discovery order in this case from the municipal court in 1990, that any witnesses they interviewed, and they didn't know then who was going to ultimately be a witness or not, none of us did, but any witness that they interviewed, and that they have been very scrupulous till now in giving us everybody they designated a witness code number to. I should note that this witness, Martha Cano, was given W128, which is the last witness number.
Were you ever given any reports of interviews of Mrs. Cano?
No, none.
All right. And
That's my point. And yet they clearly interviewed her. We were given reports. Well, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. We were given reports.
maybe they did, maybe they didn't what?
Interviewer, and they say they did, by generating this report. And for all I know, it was a casual conversation. It's not clear. But they did give us interviews of many other witnesses that have never been on their witness list and that they don't intend to call. And when we also received from them, pursuant to a supplemental discovery request, all their notes of all their interviews, it was represented to us that we were given everything. There were no notes of any interview with Mrs. Cano. So we certainly relied on the notion that they had nothing. And that's in June of 1990 when discovery is first ordered.
Well, as I said, the predicament that you're facing now is one where, in essence, you are saying that the police should have prepared a report of every conversation they had with every person they spoke to in this matter, because somebody might be called by the defense and subject to impeachment.
Well, where I was differing with the court is it doesn't have to be every word. I mean, no one ever summarizes every word. But certainly the fact that they had a contact and the gist of it when they had this all along,
Well, were there
I
any
think they
logs?
just forgot.
Were there any logs showing that Detective Solar met with Mrs. Cano?
2 logs in the Beverly Hills Police Department, I've been told. So the answer is no.
All right. Well, assuming they did forget, your remedy is that, or your suggested remedy is that the people should be precluded from putting this evidence on just because they forgot.
Well, except they had no right to go on forgetting after we gave them our witness list and her name is on it. That would have been the time before we call her to testify.
Well, did they have knowledge of the specific testimony that this is to be offered to refute?
So, well, the only thing that's in here that refutes her.
It's not the biggest thing, and I assume she has an explanation if this conversation took place as it was.
The only thing I see in here that they could use is that she described their family as close and loving. That's about the only thing in here that looks impeachable anyway.
Yeah. Well, she talks a little bit about Mr. Menendez's attitude towards the 2 defendants.
The fact that he did everything for them, we don't dispute.
Okay,
He did
so-
more than everything for them, in fact.
Isn't it understandable that based upon that context of what's in this report, that it's one that could easily have been overlooked based upon what's in the reports of your interviews with Mrs. Cano? It's not really at variance.
Well, it's just that, there's no reason. They have about a dozen more reports just as apparently inconsequential as this one that they did bother to prepare in the face of a discovery order and then subsequent discovery orders and then our long 115 discovery litigation. And there's just no excuse for not having come up with this except to sandbag, to wait till she's on the stand and then come up with this after she's committed.
Your Honor, I might point out to the court that the first signed discovery order in this case was the order this court signed. There was never any signed discovery order in this case.
Well, there was
That's all.
litigation in the municipal court regarding discovery. I certainly
That's true.
am not privy to it as far as the specifics. It was done orally, and the prosecution supplied various materials to the defense, and that was prior to the prosecution stating its position that it would request discovery under Proposition 115, which also puts this in a different light as far as how discovery ultimately is being conducted here. I'll say this, the court doesn't anticipate that this is going to be a situation where one party or the other is going to sandbag, but I don't see this as that situation. It's a very minor point, and one that even the defense concedes is understandable, and that it's the statement here doesn't really say much of anything. And so based upon the totality of that, I don't find that the appropriate sanction would be to foreclose the prosecution from using this reference. The defense certainly has a substantial response in that it was a report generated on August the 19th, 1993 at 07:15 hours. And if Detective Zoller was to so testify about it, the defense certainly would have good ammunition to impeach his testimony. But as far as the defense request to foreclose use by the prosecution of this evidence, if they elect to do so, I don't find that's appropriate remedy in regards to the allegation this is a failure of discovery. So that request would be denied. But I think this is a matter that counsel should give more thought to, and perhaps we ought to set some time aside to deal with it in regards to the discovery orders so that we don't have substantial problems in this regard, so that neither side is caught off guard. All right, so what else in regards to Mrs. Cano?
Your Honor, that's all I wanted to bring to the court's attention. In regard to what the court just mentioned, we would also like at some point soon to litigate the 1016 motion. Now, I've looked at the defense response to our motion under Evidence Code Section 1016. I don't have any further points and authorities to file because it appears that we're now dealing with a factual situation versus a legal one. And so I suggested to Mr. Burt this morning that we might, and I think Ms. Abramson, that we might want to litigate that in the near future. And so perhaps we could do the discovery and that motion at the same time so that we don't have the jury here piecemeal.
Well, in regards to the motion under Section 1016 of the Evidence Code, isn't it still premature in that the defense has not offered anything but a non-percipient expert witness so far?
Well, yes.
Other than Dr. Oziel.
Who was not offered as their expert. So it could be, I don't know, and the cases don't say precisely what triggers 1016. It could be that once they call a witness who actually spoke to either or both of the defendants, that might be the appropriate time. I just wanted to, if the court thought it was appropriate to do it now, we could do it now. But it might be better or safer to wait until it actually is, the mental state is tendered.
Well, that's up to the parties to decide when you want to have a matter resolved. But it seems to me that it shouldn't be resolved prematurely if the issue has yet to arise.
All right, then does the court want to set aside some time this week to deal with discovery?
Well, if the parties feel that it's a matter that you need resolution this week, I'll certainly be glad to do that. There might be other matters also that counsel need to resolve outside the hearing of the jury that we can calendar for the same time. I'll let you confer on that, and if you come up with a time frame, we can certainly do it.
Don't we have Friday morning open till 11, Your Honor?
Yes, we can do it then, or as I said, if there are other matters that you have that also you feel it should be dealt with outside the presence of a jury, we can do that as well, either on Friday morning or even earlier. So I want you to confer on that and let me know what your thoughts are as far as when to set aside some time. Anything else now before we have the juries come in?
Yeah, I need to get my hands on the August 16th transcript, which is when Mrs. Cano testified last, so I can pick up from there. And nobody seems to have theirs today except the original. So I just need about 5 minutes to look at that. That's okay.
Where are you going to get it?
I'm going to get it from the court reporter because she's very helpful.
You got it? Okay. I have mine here, but I want it as well. So we'll see if the reporter can find hers. All right. We'll take a very short break, give her a chance to find. Before we do that, there were two hearsay issues relating to Mrs. Cano's testimony. Did counsel wish to argue those prior to her testimony, or you feel that it's sufficient to do it during her testimony, or are these matters not going to be brought out, or what?
Are you talking about the hearsay delineated in the papers? And
Well, no, there was one reference in the documents, and she had testified outside the presence in regards to statements attributed to Jose Menendez. And secondly, there was some reference to, at least my recollection is that there was some reference to statements attributed to the defendants, one or both of them, after the August 20th events as to financial issues. And that was never litigated, never brought to head as far as what was said and how it was said, when it was said, and those circumstances. I don't know if you're going to get to that this morning or get to it at all.
This morning, but I do think we won't get to the second one this morning, but I think I have to clear up a false impression that was left on the record from last time concerning the statement of Jose Menendez. We believe, Your Honor, particularly at the time when this statement is made, I understand the statement is made when Eric is a teenager, that Jose Menendez's attitude towards his children, his ideas about them, are relevant whether he's making the statement of his attitudes, feelings, or ideas about them to them or to other people, because it's introducible as state of mind to explain action in conformity with that state of mind. And the particular statement of Jose Menendez that was brought out in the 402 was that he was, in effect, distinguishing Eric from Lyle and describing Eric as soft, weak, tender, and those were negative qualities. And it is a definite theme of Eric's life that he was not valued by his father, considered weak, considered soft, and it's our position that that's what allowed Jose Menendez to be able to molest him for so long without Eric fighting back in any way. And it also was a reason why Jose was particularly critical and brutal with Eric, because it was part of his notion of toughening his son up. And there's many other instances and aspects where Jose Menendez's disdain for this child because he was weak and tender was demonstrated later in actions that he took to overcome, if you will, this weakness. And so I believe that that statement that he makes, demonstrating his attitude towards Eric to Mrs. Cano, should be admissible. But I think it should be particularly admissible because when she was testifying before the jurors, she gave the erroneous impression that Jose treated Eric tenderly, when that's not what she was trying to say. What she was trying to say was that he recognized that Eric was more tender, but in fact treated him harshly to overcome it. And I'd like to be able to bring that out.
Well, that answer was stricken, so the evidence was not before the jury. The question was by Ms. Lansing, and what was the different behavior that you observed? The answer, he was more inclined to be tender with Eric in certain circumstances. He did not see Eric the same way he saw Lyle. Lyle was for his own image. Question, what do you mean Lyle was for his? And then objection by the prosecution, excuse me, motion to strike the answer. The court, objection sustained, the answer stricken. So that's not before the jury.
The unrun bell.
Well, it was stricken, and it was also the words used by the witness in answer to a question asked by the defense.
In any event, I would like to elicit the conversation that she had with Jose, not for the truth that Eric was or wasn't tender, but solely to show Jose Menendez's idea with respect to his son, because it will explain his conduct on many fronts over many years.
What is the people's response to that?
It is still the people's position that that is hearsay, and that what a parent expresses to a peer or a relative may not always be the way that parent treats a child. And that what is relevant here is how the parent treated the child, not what the parent had to say to others outside the child's presence. Parents will often talk about their children to other adults in such a way that they would not talk to their children. Parents sometimes favor one child over the other, but they would never reveal that in any way to the children at issue. So I think that this is particularly unreliable under Section 1252 of the Evidence Code and should not be presented to the jury.
Well, I do give Mrs. Bozanic very high points for expertise in some things, but not necessarily in child development or child psychology. Our experts are prepared to say that a child does know when they're preferentially treated, and that this expression by Jose Menendez was borne out by his behavior and shows a consistency in his attitude towards this child, which explains why he shifted his sexual abuse activities from his older son, who was a much stronger personality as a small child, to his younger son, who was a much weaker personality, and was able to so dominate the younger son that the molestation could continue into his late teens.
Well, when was this statement made?
1988, when the molestation is still continuing, and he still considers the son, his victim, to be tender and weak.
All right, so it wasn't some statement made when Eric Menendez was a young child, but when he was in his late teens or middle to late teens.
Well, but I think that it's even more significant if made in his late teens. I think it even more clearly demonstrates the father's perception of Eric's weakness and his ability to continue to abuse and molest him.
Well, is that what was said, or was it just the description of the defendant? And is that state of mind evidence really, or is it just a statement?
I think it's a state of mind. The mind state is attitude, and attitude about this child, feelings about this child, analysis of this child who is his victim. And I think it's relevant because it explains his behavior, even extending this late into this child's life. He is still extremely brutal with him and totally controlling of him and totally judgmental, critical, and dismissive of him. And one of the main reasons why he has always undervalued this child is because he's always considered him weak and soft and too emotional. And we've heard from other witnesses that being emotional, having feelings, being that way was definitely a deficit in this family. It was a negative trait.
Well, all that said, isn't the issue still how Eric Menendez was treated, not what was said in a description of his character or personality by his father, but actually how he was treated.
It corroborates what he will say about his treatment, what other people have already said about his treatment. It corroborates, contrary to what Mrs. Bozander said, usually if parents say, I hate that kid, they demonstrate that. And if a parent said he's weak, he's tender, he's too soft, they tend to communicate that to the kid. Or they tend to act to either, if they're a decent parent, in recognition of those feelings, if they're a brutal parent, in order to somehow change those feelings. People do tend to act in conformity to what they believe. And it isn't true that it's just an idle statement. He's talking to his sister, number one, not just making idle chatter on the street. And it's one of the few conversations in which he ever expressed his attitude towards his children to a third party. So it's highly reliable because he isn't in the habit of making casual statements about his attitude towards the boys. And it does reflect very clearly what his perception of this child was for years and the brutal treatment he gave the child as a consequence of it.
Well, I don't know if all that follows from what the statement is, but that's...
It builds.
The issue is, number one, under Section 1250 of the Evidence Code, whether this is a state of evidence of his existing state of mind, emotion, or physical sensation, including a statement of intent, plan, motive, design, mental feeling, pain, or bodily health.
I'm not offering it under 1250, Your Honor.
What are you offering it for?
It's not hearsay at all. It's not being offered in any way, shape, or form for the truth, only to show a perception of Jose Menendez. It's not being offered to show Eric is weak. It's not being offered to show that he is tender. That's just the father's negative perception of him. It's to show that this father had a negative perception of this child, period. The rest follows logically because of how people tend to act on their feelings. But all the statements being offered to show is a negative attitude of this father to this child.
Okay, what's the people's response to that, since the defense is not offering it to show the truth of the statements, and you've cited Section 1252 as your response, which would not be applicable under this circumstance.
If it's not offered for the truth of the matter asserted, then the defense argument is relevant to show that he had a bad attitude. Is that correct?
That's what they're saying.
All right. Then in that case, it appears that the statement would have to be limited upon its receipt by the court to the jury, so the jury understands that it's not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted.
Fine, I have no problem with that.
All right. Okay, that seems to resolve that issue then. Anything else?
We can talk about the financial issue before we convene for the afternoon, so we can get the jury's out. That's coming at the end of her testimony, and
Then there's another segment of her testimony, Your Honor, that will only be offered in front of Eric's jury because it has to do with his purchase and the spending evidence that's only been admitted in front of Eric's jury.
All right, anything else then by either side before the jury comes out? Okay, then let's get the juries out, please.